kaulana na pua o Hawaii Kupa ama hope o ka aina Iki mai ka elele o ka loko I
Aloha, I am Pokalai Nui and welcome to A Second Glance, where we take an in-depth look at issues in and around Hawaii. This program is actually a takeoff from two earlier programs, and that is a takeoff from a very important and significant program that occurred on the 23rd and 24th of July, where a community organization or people from a community under the 96792 zip code banner got together, and these are the Waianae Nanakuli community folks, got together and said, let's put together a candidates forum. A candidates forum in which we have candidates come to us and address our concerns, our questions, not in a debate format, but in a format in which we can actually have a discussion. And we will pose the questions that we are concerned about, and we would like to have them respond to the questions so that we can measure the character, the sensibility, how a candidate deals with the subject, whether or not they're familiar or not familiar with it. And what we'll do is give them the questions in advance so that they will be able to ponder it before actually coming on the television show. Now, these shows are supposed to be playing on Olelo Media on channel 53. That's where they were originally broadcast live, and they may be repeating on other channels, but I suspect that they are being repeated on channel 53. So I'm following up from those programs and trying to give a little bit more substance to the questions that had been asked, and maybe a little discussion. Now, these are questions that reflect the concerns of the Waianae community, but I believe that they are so central to Hawaii that they reflect questions that come from many different pockets of Hawaii, and in fact, maybe not only pockets, but a broader scope or a broader sweep of the Hawaii community. In the earlier programs, I talked about the Hawaiian national question. And with those people who see themselves as Hawaiian nationals, how should the society deal with such people, both with the Hawaiian National Society as well as with the United States federal government, as well as the United States' state government, the state of Hawaii. These I call the colonial governments because they are essentially colonial regimes that had taken over an independent nation back in 1893, had a regime change and confessed to it. So it's not I'm creating a fantasy, but if you read Public Law 103-150, U.S. public law, you will see that this is what had indeed happened in Hawaii back in 1893. In fact, Hawaii is regarded by many scholars and historians, not necessarily exclusive, of being the first example of regime change in the world by the United States. And so following the pattern of regime change in Hawaii, creating a puppet government and then swallowing in that puppet government, to have that puppet government conform to the wishes of the United States. And then they went out and committed such regime changes in other parts of the world. But rather than getting distracted into that, that was what the first question or set of questions dealt with. Now, there were other questions that we also asked, and what I'm going to do is go through some of those questions and give you at least my take on what those questions or how those questions should be viewed. One question dealt with education programs and policies, what we call the shifting role of education programs and policies for the people. I'm going to read from some of the questions that we posed because some of them are somewhat long and complicated, and I don't want to misstate what had been given to the candidates. With regards to education, what is said is that Hawaii's education system has shifted to meet the demands of the society's economic, industrial, military, and political objectives. Indigenous people across the world, as well as in Hawaii, have asserted a different goal of education of indigenous peoples, the goal of maintaining the indigenous consciousness of their people. Thus, for indigenous peoples, they cherish language and cultural educational systems, relationship to Aina and Kai, or land and sea, a national and personal genealogical foundation, indigenous healing methods, and so forth. Can the educational system of Hawaii give equal consideration to these two general directions? Can there be a shared purpose in the DOE system? And let me elaborate on those, or what has just been read. Because the general rant that I am familiar with that comes out of the Department of Education has always been school to work, school to work, school to work. The idea that the education system should be a process of pumping out industrial workers so that they can get into the factories and produce for businesses or industries or military. That's why school to work, school to work. What about philosophy? What about art and science? What about the enjoyment of the human spirit? What about those many other things that are important in a person's life? Not merely as a worker or as an employee. You may as well just say student to slavery, student to slavery. That's not what the education system is supposed to be. And for indigenous people, they are saying something else. Stop trying to remake, stop trying to clone, stop trying to take our in Hawaii case, our Hawaiian youth, and simply manufacture them into your servants for your society. What we are concerned about is the maintenance of our continuity of consciousness, to be able to reach back into our roots and not lose sight of those roots, because for us, we have nowhere else to go. If we lose that, we become nothing else but the foreigner within us. It's not necessarily a bad place to go, but at least we should have the choice, and at least we should have the foundation for which we can go back into our history, our culture, to understand what are our aspirations and our forefathers' aspirations for us, and how do we maintain that long line of continuity of our consciousness that are contained in our language, in our history, in our arts and science, in our belief systems, and all of that. And that's what the education system should be for indigenous people. So on one hand, you have industrial purposes for education. And on the other hand, you have, especially for indigenous people, maintaining the indigenous consciousness. Can there be a shared purpose within our educational system? Or must it be one or the other? And normally it's only one. It's been to feed into the industrial or employment system. Can there be a shared purpose? Is there room for the indigenous populations in Hawaii and in many other parts of the world to give credence to the importance of the maintenance of continuity of consciousness? Some people would also go so far as to say, well, it shouldn't be reserved only for the indigenous people. Shouldn't other people within the community or within the society also join and be educated, should they elect, as indigenous people, to learn their language, learn their culture, to expose themselves to the great beauty and the great wealth of other people's languages and cultures? And in the same way, I would argue, exposing indigenous people to foreign coaches, but they're already undergoing that, so that doesn't seem to have been a problem. Okay, so that was one of the questions that we had posed to the candidates. The other question was staying with the system of education, and I'm going to read it. The general approach to society's responsibility for education begins at preschool and ends at high school. But with the great technological advances, which has so rapidly altered ways of learning, and considering the lengthening of life expectancy of the population, should there be a reconsideration of the scope of education and moving it more to a lifelong learning experience and changing the institutional rules to accommodate such learning. In other words, should the focus of education shift from K to 12 to focus from birth to death? Imagine an education, now I'm elaborating. Imagine an education system that was not looking only at the K to 12 spectrum, but said, no, we need to educate for a much wider spectrum. From the moment of birth, some people would go even before that, while the fetus is gestating within the womb. You can already begin an experiential or educational process. Some people say, hey, that's far too early, leave the kid alone. Okay, give him a chance to mature. Yeah, I guess you could, there's a fair argument to that. But some people or some children are very fast to learn. So don't keep them away from the learning experience. Of course, it's not necessarily through book learning, but there are many things that a child learns. And so the education system of the society needs to provide opportunities for child education, even before they get to school. And on the other end, it shouldn't end at 12 years. And many people are now talking about, yes, you have to go into post-high school education systems. And I'm saying that's right. And not only within the formal education system, but you need to expand education to go beyond the institutions of education, and perhaps change the definition of the institutions of education to recognize the sky, the ocean, the general environment, to recognize social interaction, to recognize the many, many other ways in which education should be carried out, and not limited to only a particular age, but continue all the way to a person expires. Why not? Isn't life something that continues, and education goes along with life to such an extent that should never end? And only in that way can you enjoy the fullness of life, rather than relegating a person because of his age to no more growth in education. So a rethinking of what education is for our society. That is essentially what that question was all about. Unfortunately, we didn't get too much thoughtfulness, I felt, from the candidates who responded. So I was somewhat disappointed with regards to that question. But you have an opportunity to start thinking about these things and get together with your community organizations, your civic clubs, your schools, your churches, and ask yourselves these questions. And for not only this education question, but all of the questions that we had been posing. I think these are important questions. The next question was the issue of transportation, addressing the current community conditions and development planning for the future. That's how we phrase this. You see, transportation systems in Hawaii seems to be developed as a reaction to urbanization, which have taken place around the industrial, military, and business interests of the society. The transportation challenge is in quickly and safely moving the population from bedrooms to work, service or entertainment destinations. What opportunities are there for planning our societies of the future, where people are already living by and large among their places of work, entertainment, and services, such that the need for movement is at a minimum in carrying out the needs of living? Let me take an excursion from the written statement that we have and explain it in another way. You have point A at one point, point B at another point. Point A, bedrooms, or where people live. Point B is where your services are at, where your employment is at, where your entertainment is at, a destination point. And so the problem becomes one in an urban society: how do you move people from your bedrooms to your destination point? And so you talk about H1 freeway, you talk about Farrington Highway, you talk about all these different places and how to make easier to move from point A to point B. But in planning, and if we can sit and take a look at the future of Hawaii and not only be reactionary in terms of where we're at right now, but let's plan for the future. What kind of opportunities do we have now to plan for 25 years from now? How do we mold our society such that we can place point B close to or part of point A? And so that's essentially what we are talking about. What are the new methods of creating urban planning? And where is it going on around Hawaii today? And what would be the candidates' position on that kind of planning? Let's hear some ideas. One of the good ideas was, well, we have ocean all around us. Let's move people across the waters. I think it's a grand idea. Why should we use the waters merely for entertainment, for leisurely fishing and other things? It had been used as a basis of transportation. It still is for ships plying the waters from island to island or island to a big island. But why not use it for our practical purposes of moving people themselves? Okay. So anyway, I think urban planning is necessary. And I also, or in that continuing written explanation, we say, is urban planning for our communities today limited to reacting to the past development of Hawaii? Or are there opportunities to plan for the future such that we can organize communities in a more sensible way so people can comfortably live, work, and entertain themselves and receive other services in close proximity with one another? What specific proposals would you have? That's what we ask the candidates, and I pose that question to you as well. So moving on to another idea that we had wanted to flesh out. We use the term internal refugees. Internal refugees. Where did that term come from? Well, we created it because as we observed what was happening in Hawaii, we can apply the term refugees to people from other parts of the world. But what's happening in our society? Are these folks not refugees themselves, somehow trying to escape from conditions of intolerance, conditions of unlivability, conditions, whatever the conditions are? And shouldn't we be addressing them as internal refugees? So what we did was we asked, using the term internal refugees, how should we respond to those seeking refuge from their inhospitable conditions? yet unable to seek relief by escaping to a foreign land. You see, foreign refugees often will escape to a foreign land. In Hawaii, there's not much opportunity to escape to a foreign land, and other people will not look kindly to claiming that you are a refugee having to leave Hawaii because conditions, the living condition, the housing condition, the cost of living is so high that you can't live. Some people say, well, you're probably overstating the point at this point, po ka lainui. And I'm saying maybe I am for you, but there are so many of our brothers and sisters down the beaches, in the caves, under the bridges, up in the mountains, in conditions so inhospitable that they are escaping to these areas that seem to them to be more hospitable. And so I consider them to be refugees. I don't think it's overstating the case. But anyway, with regards to these internal refugees, and I read now from the document that we proposed, we say the current treatment of those people we could classify as internal refugees is to treat them as the homeless. But homelessness is often just one shared condition which they generally face. Our local refugee problem consists of many more social, economic, political, educational, and health challenges. Sometimes their problems may be grouped together by ethnicity, by political conditions, and so forth. So let's take a look at these. The native Hawaiian refugee suffers from political disinheritance and a constant attack upon a demand upon them for conformance to the U.S. political order. They suffer from land disenfranchisement, from a cultural and historical disconnect, and a resulting traumatic, comprehensive injury to their traditional anchors in Hawaii. They maintain a general strident rebellion against government programs and activities, and they maintain a healthy distrust for government agencies. Some of that you can see, although you don't want to admit it in that way, but you can see it in the flags being raised at the homeless shelters or among the tents on the beaches, the Hawaiian flag, in protest to the American occupation of Hawaii. So that's an indication that their particular viewpoint and their conditions revolve around, to a large extent, that disinheritance, that political disjointedness that has occurred. And remember, it's not the fault of these people who are now homeless. They are not the thieves. They are not the ones who stole someone else's government. They are the victims. Okay, enough said. Let's turn to another group, and that is the Micronesian refugees. They also suffer from issues of homelessness, but with priority to obtain homes from government housing programs based on an agreement made with the United States and with the Micronesian folks. Their problem is language difficulty with English, health problems as a direct result caused from nuclear testing in their traditional homes, uprootedness, and lack of a continued cohesive community as a people. A changed physical environment where traditional lifestyle living is not available in the urban areas of Hawaii. Their educational level generally ranges in the low to medium educational achievement and often lack Western lifestyle experiences. So that's a different way of seeing and grouping that particular group. So it's not just the fact that they're homeless. No, they're homeless and they often face these special conditions. As you work in the field of human services, you recognize that each human being is a special, faces special circumstance, is a special case. So you cannot just take all of the homeless as one and the same, but they come from different experiences, different backgrounds, and they need to be treated differently. Okay, let's go to the American transit population or transient population. They are generally self-displaced due to harsh environmental conditions and find the Hawaiian environment much more accommodating even while living on the streets in urban Honolulu. Their general lifestyle is one of accepting individualism and they're not from a culture of strong social or family networking. And if they do network, they are comfortable in doing so via telephone, mail, or computer. So that's some of the characteristics of the American displaced homeless. Their educational level can range from the very low to very high academically and experientially. Okay. And then another group, those facing primary and behavioral health challenges. They range across the ethnic and cultural communities of the homeless. These individuals and families have had their health challenges unresolved for generally a longer period of time than they have had their housing needs go unanswered. Often their solution is not found in housing placement, nor in hookups with current services in the primary or behavioral health care sectors, but in appropriate primary and behavioral health services that address their overall family conditions, taking into consideration their cultural, spiritual, as well as medical and nutritional conditions. What plans do we have to address this general problem of internal refugees? So with that, I close my discussion, and thank you very much for allowing me to come into your private places and share some of these ideas with you. Aloha Hawaii, ahui ho.
Kaulana nā pua o Hawaii, Kupa'a mahope o ka ʻaina, Iki mai ka ʻelele o ka loko ino, Pala pala a nunu me ka paka.